Okay, great. So we are looking at heart anatomy and function, talking about the cardiovascular system. And what we need to look at here is just kind of an overview of what the cardiovascular system is. It is a closed system. So we have the heart and blood vessels. And by a closed system, we mean we're not pumping out to anywhere. Basically, the stuff that gets pumped out comes back to be repumped. The purpose of the heart is to pump blood, and we have vessels which allow that blood to be circulated. The function of the cardiovascular system is to deliver oxygen, nutrients, remove carbon dioxide, and waste products. Basically, everything that gets into any cell of your body or anything that comes out of any cell of your body has gone through the cardiovascular system. And that includes oxygen, vitamins, minerals, all of the nutrients that our body uses. Now, the location of the heart is right about here. We have the diaphragm, and the heart sits on top of the diaphragm. It's about the size of your fist. It's got a pointy end called the apex, which is actually pointed downward. And I know that's kind of counterintuitive. We generally think of the apex of anything as being up, but in this case, it's down here. We've got the base, which has all of the major vessels coming out at the top. And so the apex is kind of pointed toward your left hip. The base is pointed more or less toward your right shoulder. And this just gives you a view of the location. You can see the diaphragm lies here. You can see the heart there. And the heart lies underneath the sternum, kind of between the sternum and the vertebral column. Just another view to kind of give you a sense of the location. There's the diaphragm there. We've got lungs on either side. And this image shows you a lot of the major vessels, other structures which we will talk about more in lab. So I wouldn't be too worried about this right at the moment. I will point out the ones that are important for lecture content as we go through. The heart has a covering. We've talked about epithelium, endothelium, things like that in the past when we were going over some of the materials in chapters 3 and 4. So the heart has a covering. It's called the pericardium, and it's a double-walled sac. Basically, what we're looking at is we have serous membranes, which are simple squamous epithelium, which release a fluid into the area in between. So we have a visceral pericardium, which lies on top of the organ itself, and then we have a parietal pericardium, which is in the chamber that the heart is in. Now, all of this is surrounded by a fibrous pericardium, which actually kind of restricts the amount that the heart can expand. It's a limiting, tough wall. When we look at the serous pericardium, that is the visceral and the parietal pericardium, there is a serous fluid that lies between those, so the heart can kind of twist around inside the chamber that is created by these two sets of tissues. So if you look at it, we've got the heart. This is the myocardium. We have the visceral pericardium, which is on the surface here. Now, it actually makes a turn. So the visceral pericardium and the parietal pericardium are continuous. And then this space in between is filled with that fluid. This is the fibrous pericardium that surrounds the chamber. We also have within the heart endocardium, which is, again, simple squamous epithelium. And one of the reasons we have that is that blood cells, the platelets involved in clotting, don't stick to epithelium. They do stick to the connective tissue below. So if there is a tear or damage in here, then you can develop a clot. So the heart wall, basically, we have three layers. We have the epicardium, we've talked about, serous parietal, outside layer. We have some connective tissue, of course, underneath every bit of endothelium or epithelium of any sort. We have connective tissues. We have the myocardium, which is the biggest, thickest part. It's mostly muscle. And then endocardium, which lies within. Now, the three layers we were talking about, and another view, once again, similar to what we were looking at before. Yeah, again, showing you this image. So we have endocardium, we have pericardium on the outside, the myocardium making up the muscle, and you really can't see the fibrous pericardium in this case. The heart consists of 4 chambers, and we have the atria, which are receiving chambers. They make the heart a little bit more efficient, like about 20% more, but they are not absolutely necessary. In fact, there are a lot of animals, like lizards, things like that have a 2-chambered heart. This just allows blood to flow and briefly be stored between heartbeats, which makes that just slightly more efficient. As we go on and we look here, we've got, again, the heart chambers. We've got 2 atria. These are upper chambers. 2 ventricles that are lower chambers. And the ventricles are the ones that do the bulk of the work. We've got a right ventricle and a left ventricle, and we'll talk about how they function in just a second here. But if you were to look at the heart, you would notice if you cut it that one side has very thick walls and one side has very thin walls. And this is because the right side of the heart is receiving blood from the body under pretty low pressure, and then it pumps that blood to the lungs. So it doesn't have to pump it very far, so it doesn't have to use as much force. So the muscle on the right side of the heart is fairly thin. The left side of the heart has to pump to the entire body, has to push against gravity, has to do, take it up to your brain and down to your little toe, and so it has to generate a lot more force. When we are talking about someone's blood pressure, say 120/80, the 120 is the measure of the force that the left side of the heart is exerting as it pumps. Now, because we have 4 chambers, we have to have dividers between them. And we have an interventricular septum, which is more muscle, that separates the 2 ventricles. And if we go back here, you can see this area would be the interventricular septum. And we have the interatrial septum. And if you look here, there is just some thin tissue separating the 2 atria. Now, before you are born, these 2 atria actually communicate with one another. There's a structure here called the fossa ovalis, and that structure at one point in time was an opening that allowed blood flowing to that atria to go directly to the other side and then be moved back into circulation. Essentially, before you're born, you don't need to be sending blood to the lungs, because the lungs aren't working. So both sides of the heart during that period of time function to pump blood through the body and out to the placenta. As we go through the heart, we have a number of valves, and these valves prevent backflow, because without the valves in place, what would happen is the heart would contract. Say the heart contracts, blood flows upward, but as soon as the heart relaxed, it would flow back into the chambers. So a valve, which basically opens and then closes, the valves open, blood flows out the chamber, it closes back down. Blood cannot get back into the chamber. And we have 4 valves. 2 are called AV valves, or atrioventricular valves. And these are include the bicuspid or mitral valve, which is on the left side of the heart, and then the tricuspid, which is on the right side of the heart. And these valves prevent fluid from going from the atria, or from the ventricles back into the atria. We also have semilunar valves, and anytime blood is leaving the heart, it's going out a semilunar valve. Anytime blood comes into the heart, it will pass through one of the AV valves. Now, there's different words for this. There's left atrioventricular, mitral valve, or bicuspid valve. I personally like to use bicuspid valve. A bicuspid is a tooth. Being a dentist, yeah, bicuspid, I can understand. And then we have the tricuspid valve, which just has 3 leaflets instead of 2. The semilunar valves also have 3 leaflets. They are a bit smaller, and they're structurally a little different as well. So if you look here, here is the right atrioventricular, also known as the tricuspid valve, and blood flows from the atrium through that, and then when the ventricle contracts, that valve is going to close. And it has some specialized structures we'll talk about in a minute called chordae tendineae, which allow it to not evert as it is. The valve closes like that, but without those structures, it could do that, and then you'd end up with blood flow backwards. We see chordae tendineae on both of the AV valves. Here are the semilunar valves, and this is the pulmonary semilunar. It's called pulmonary because it's going out to the lungs. And so when the heart contracts, this valve opens up to allow fluid to go, in this case, to the lung. The valves basically keep blood flowing in one direction. And so we have those 4, as we said, mitral, semilunar, and so forth. Now, the AV valves have some specialized structures called chordae tendineae. They're sometimes referred to as heartstrings, but they keep the valves from over-opening. You know, when a valve closes, these little strings, which are on these very fine leaflets, there's really very could easily be over-opened, which would be called a prolapse. And so this keeps them from prolapsing. This is a view of the tricuspid valve, and we have the chordae tendineae here. So when blood flows in, it passes through that tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve has the chordae tendineae. The chordae tendineae are actually attached to papillary muscles. And so when the heart starts beating harder, those papillary muscles pull more on the chordae tendineae to keep the heart from doing that, just to keep it going more like that rather than like that. The heart, if the heart is beating very strong, it can still open those a little bit, and we see this in athletes sometimes when they are really working hard. We see it in women who are pregnant. You get a prolapse. You end up with a murmur as a result of that.